Okay, welcome to the Edgar Rice Burroughs podcast, episode number 19, where we are celebrating the works of the greatest storyteller of the 20th century. My name is Tim DeForest. I am the author of several books on what I call pre-digital pop culture, things such as the pulp magazines that Burroughs was published in, old-time radio, old comic strips and comic books, and so on. I keep a blog about those things at Comics Old Time Radio and other cool stuff. And I will now let my podcast partners introduce themselves.
My name is Jess Terrell, and you might have bumped into me on Facebook at the Edgar Rice Burroughs discussion group named For the Love of All Things Edgar Rice Burroughs. There with Lola Pop and some 4,000 ERB fans. We talk Edgar Rice Burroughs pretty near all the time. We'd love to have you join us. For the love of all things Edgar Rice Burroughs.
And I'm Scott Stewart, freelance writer and editor, and glad to be part of this team.
Okay, and we are going to be continuing our discussion tonight of The Mad King, the novel that was originally published in two parts. The first part in 1914, serialized in All Story magazine, and the second part serialized a year later in 1915. It was later combined into the novel The Mad King. If you haven't listened to episode number 18 yet, you can go back and give that a listen. We talk about the first part of the novel, and the second part picks up after the start of what we now call World War I, they would have been calling at the time the Great War, and that began in August of 1914 when a Serbian assassinated the Archduke of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. That caused Austria-Hungary to declare war on Serbia, and a lot of other countries had treaties to help one another. It started a domino effect of countries declaring war on each other, so that soon you had Germany and Austria fighting against France, Britain, and Russia. And there were other countries involved as well, but those were the major players. So amongst all this confusion, we have the fictional country of Lutha, the setting of the Mad King, which is sandwiched in between Serbia and Austria-Hungary. So the important thing to keep in mind here is that in real life, at this time, Austria and Serbia were at war with each other. Also in real life, Serbia would eventually be overrun by the Austrian forces. But right now, they are still two independent countries fighting each other. And in the Edgar Rice Burroughs universe, this little postage stamp country of Lutha is stuck right between them, which means that they're in an important strategic position between these two countries that are at war with one another. And it's important to keep that in mind as we get into the story itself. Though the story will pick up, part 2, chapter 1 will pick up in Nebraska, right? So Jeff,
yes, in Beatrice,
yep,
Nebraska.
You were going to be reviewing the first few chapters.
You talking to me?
Oh, yes. Sorry, Jess. Yeah.
It's quite all right. Yes, I'll be happy to proceed here with the first few chapters of part 2 for the Mad King. Let's recap once again some of the principal characters. I did this on the first half of our podcast, so I think it might be prudent just to run through this again. I'll be brief if that's possible, and I would encourage jot down these names if you like. The capital of Lutha is the capital is Leustadt. The Lutha is the country, Leustat's the city. The Mad King is Leopold, and he is cousins with our hero Barney Custer. Barney is from Beatrice, Nebraska, where the story is going to resume here when I get underway here in just a moment. One of the good guys that we may run into is Prince Ludwig von der Tan. Ludwig von der Tan is an enemy of Peter Blentz. Peter Blentz, of course, is a villain. He lives in a grim castle. I like to think of the word blah, Blentz, grim. Peter Blentz is a villain. That's how I remember that. Von Koblich is the Minister of War. He's another villain. I think of the word conflict, Minister of War, conflict, Koblich kind of goes with the word conflict. These are my memory aids. Captain Ernest Mink is a villain. His last name includes the letters N-E-C-K, So I call him a pain in the neck. He's also been called a weasel. That wasn't me, but I think the name fits. Emma von der Tan, she's a princess. Burroughs stories generally have princesses, and she's our princess for this story. She's the daughter of Ludwig von der Tan, whom we mentioned earlier. He's a good guy, so she's okay. And she has, I'll just tell you right now, she has an interest in our hero, Barney. There is also Lieutenant Butzow, who's a good guy, who has been a good friend here with Barney. In fact, he is in Beatrice, Nebraska also. So now we begin with part 1, chapter 1. I beg your pardon. This would be part, no, stop. Hold still. Wrong notes. All right. To begin with part 2, chapter 1, that's part 2, he said. With Barney in Nebraska, Beatrice, Nebraska. The title of the chapter is Barney Returns to Luther, but we're not there yet. We're still in Beatrice. With Lieutenant Butzow, Barney's sister Victoria, and Barney. In Beatrice, Nebraska, Victoria, Barney's sister, wanted to go motoring with Lieutenant Butzow. It was his last day with them before he's returned to Luther, and she wanted to take a car ride with him. However, she had already promised her friend Margaret to play bridge, so she decided to hold true to that promise. Meanwhile, Barney and his business partner Bert, along with Butzow, visited the corn mill that Barney owns. And as we've already established, Butzow with Barney have fled Luther 2 years earlier, so we've talked about that. But with Prince Ludwig von der Tan, who is still over in Luther, has promised protection if Butzow would come back to Luther. So that's why Butzow is going over Luther, so he can give them a hand. World War I's going on, so I'm sure they need good leaders there. Ludwig prized Butzow's military skills, and war was brewing between Serbia and Austria, as we were just describing. Luther was expected to get involved in that. So that's why Butzow is going to go back to Luther. In addition, von der Tan warned that King Leopold of Luther was suspected of having sent emissaries to the United States to search for Barney and Butzow. Another good reason for Butzow to leave town, but Barney's still in Beatrice. Not sure what those emissaries were going to do, but they're all villains, so I can imagine what they might do. Barney wanted to go back to Luther with Butzow, but since he had been gone most of the time for the past 2 years, he thought the noble thing to do, and Barney has proven to be a noble Burroughs hero. Barney felt he ought to stay home, so Bert, who has worked faithfully at the corn mill that Barney owns for 2 years while Barney was off gallivanting in Luther, so Bert could take a vacation from the corn mill. Enter a mysterious person carrying a mysterious package. Gee, I wonder what this could be. The mysterious person hides behind the boxcar. Then after Barney has entered the office, this mysterious person sets off a bomb. But unknown to the mysterious person, and at first unknown to the reader, Barney has stepped out of the office through the back door, and thus he was not hurt in this spectacular explosion. But the car mill was destroyed. And as I said, it was a spectacular explosion. The next morning, they surveyed the damage. They thought, gee whiz, maybe it's a lightning strike. They didn't know anything about this fellow with this bomb. Butzow was thinking that perhaps Leopold, who is the king over in Luther, the Mad King, I might add, that Leopold might have been responsible for this explosion. He pointed out that King Leopold may attempt to get rid of Barney so that Leopold would have a clear path if he wants to pursue Emma. And Leopold, while he may be rotten to the core, he does want to pursue Emma. Lesson to learn here: if it can go wrong, it will. At the train station, Victoria urged the departing Butzow to come back someday, and he stammered and flushed a bit as he said he would. Now, the thing I haven't figured out here, which has got me wondering, is that this is occurring after the first part of the Eternal Lover, Eternal Savage book, where Victoria has already met New, son of New. Now, maybe she's thinking maybe she's just looking for love now, so she's lost out there with New, son of New, and Butzow's available. So perhaps that's the reason, or maybe she just likes his company. They don't explore that any further, but the question arose in my mind. Because at this point, Victoria has met New, but that's another book, Eternal Lover, Eternal Savage. You don't have to worry about that right now. Just enjoy Mad King. That evening, Barney sat on his porch, smoking a cigar and dreaming about Emma. Then Barney spotted a shadow that moved in the yard. It's a lesson to learn, beware of shadows that move. He kept watch, and the shadow continued to move. He watched the shadow, it moved. He watched it move. He watched it move. Barney sneaks outside, tackles the shadow, only to discover it is our old buddy, Captain Ernest Mink, who we all thought was dead. Now, Mink is the fellow that I call a pain in the neck because of the spelling of his name. That's how I remember him. He was left for dead in a dilapidated building in Luther, from which you all talked about, from which he and Bootsau had rescued King Leopold to restore Leopold to the throne. They thought Mink was dead. Everybody thought Mink was dead. Some assassins prefer poison darts, and some will tie you to the train tracks. But these assassins from Luther favor bombs. While attempting to snuff, Mink's got a bomb with him. So while attempting to snuff the fuse, Barney loses his grip on Mink, so the villain escapes. So he's going to plague us a little bit longer. And and also, as far as I could tell, if you all see otherwise, say so. I did not see where Barney reported any of these shenanigans to the police.
I never thought of that, but I don't think he does.
Somewhere there's a Nebraska state trooper who pulls into Beatrice, Nebraska, wondering, did there used to be a corn mill where that hole is now? Why didn't anyone tell us about this? So that's another mystery, which may remain a mystery.
I don't think he even reports it to an insurance company. So.
Well, that too is a mystery. So I'm glad you thought of that. We may have talked to the insurance company later on. Barney does decide, even though he's neglected his duty to report things, Barney does decide he must leave Beatrice, and there's reasons for that. He figures that others might be hurt in further attempts on his life. That makes sense. He needs to hunt for Mink to exact revenge, and the corn mill's destroyed. So gee whiz, he no longer needs to work at the corn mill, so no need to stick around town. Not sure what he's going to do for income or what the community will do to get his corn meal ground, but that's another story. We stick here to the story at hand, which is Mad King. And I suppose that also means Bert can extend his vacation. Barney expects the trail will lead him to Luther, not only for Mink, but for a certain brown-eyed princess named Emma. Gee, this all could work out. Barney sets forth in a new gray roadster. You recall he crashed his old roadster in the previous part of this book. This is a newer model than the one he wrecked in Luther. He tracks Mink first to Lincoln, Nebraska, and then to New York City, where he obtains newspaper credentials from an old college friend. Thus empowered, he scans the ocean liner passenger list. He's a member of the press, so he can get into things. And he saw Mink's name on a steamer that sailed that very morning. Barney realized this could be a blessing in disguise. Barney felt that punishment for Mink could be limited to American law, especially when you don't report the crimes. Hence my earlier point about the corn mill. Barney realized his best opportunity to battle Mink again would likely come in Luther itself. You know, if you do battle with someone in the USA and someone ends up getting hurt or ends up getting killed, then people ask questions. So better off to do that in another country, I reckon. That's why you report crimes, so the law can take care of it. Barney booked passage by way of Italy to Austria. Italy to Austria. I get my countries confused here. Like I said, when you're going to Luther, you start in south of Europe, and you're better off to start at the top of the Italy boot. It's closer that way. Then you go north, you find Austria-Hungary with the hyphen. You turn right, there's Luther. You can't miss it. Barney stopped, but Barney doesn't get all the way to Luther. So he gets to Italy. He does go up in that direction, but he stops at Burgova because the Austrian army officials weren't impressed with his newspaper credentials, and they're genuine too. They would not allow him to cross into Luther, so he's stuck at the border. However, the delay at Burgova worked to his advantage, one of those great Burroughs coincidences. Barney found room at the inn with a thin wall, meaning the conversation next door, the room next door to his, woke him up. The first speaker was a Count Zellerndorf of Austria, who has worked behind the scenes against Leopold of Luther and in favor of Peter and Company. Among the things Barney learned, I've got a laundry list here. These are the things Barney learned by listening through the wall to the people next door and at the end here. Count Zellerndorf convinced Leopold that Peter, Koblik, and Mink were his most loyal friends. All those guys are on our villain list, but he's telling Leopold that they're all his friends and loyal to boot. With friends like these, there is no hope. Count Zellerndorf convinced Leopold that old von der Tan, that's Ludwig von der Tan, who we've spoken very highly of and who is a good guy, that old von der Tan either aspired to the throne himself or desired to place Barney on the throne. Either way, Leopold's not going to like von der Tan, which is a terrible move by Leopold, because von der Tan is probably the only friend he's got. Because the blood of Victoria Rubenroth of the Luther family royal line flowed in Barney's veins. That's Barney's mom, Victoria Rubenroth. Yes, Barney's sister has the same first name as Barney's mom. But here we're talking about Barney's mom, Victoria Rubenroth, because Barney has royal blood in his veins. Furthermore, von der Tan could gain public support for Barney by marrying him off to his daughter, Emma. So all this is going to excite Leopold, who's already kind of weird anyhow. Weaselly, I think was the term we applied to him. All right, number 3 on my list of discoveries here. The untimely death of Leopold could pave the way for Peter to become king. So if you get Leopold out of the way, you keep Barney out of the way, the path to the throne for Peter is pretty clear. And it was Peter who hatched the plot to kill Barney and Bootsau in the USA as a way of carrying further favor with Leopold. That's how that Carnville got destroyed. Blame it on Peter. He's the guy that made all that possible. So we know who to blame here. Barney learned that the Count was speaking to Peter of Blentz, Captain Mink, and Koblik. So that's our collection of villains to be on the lookout here for. The Count gave these 3, Peter, Mink, and Koblik, passes to get them through the army lines so they can get into Luther. Barney's already discovered that's difficult. These guys have passes. So as the chapter ends, the reader learns that while the chapter title is something like Get Back to Luther, something like that, Barney returns to Luther, the chapter title is a little misleading. He's not quite there yet. He's at the border, and he's been surrounded by bad guys next door. He's definitely trying to get there, but he's not to Luther just yet. So that concludes part 2, chapter 1, The Return to Luther. Any comments from you all?
Well, I want to say that Barney gets to Austria by going through Italy. Early in the war, that would have been possible because Italy was neutral for the first not quite year of the war. Eventually, Italy will declare war on Austria-Hungary, becoming on the Allied side. But this presumably is still early in the war, so getting to Austria via Italy is a logical route. It actually makes sense.
These events, I think, take place about a year after the ending of the part 1. So,
yeah, and I get the impression that the World War I is really just started. So, Italy would still be a neutral country at this time. So travel into Austria would have been possible.
Yeah, in those days, things didn't move quite as fast as they might move today. Which is a good thing when you got ruffled feathers and you hope you get things soothed before people start declaring war on each other.
Yeah.
All right. If there's nothing else, let's continue on with chapter 2. So we're talking part 2, chapter 2. The title is Condemned to Death. After overhearing the conversation of the conspirators, Barney knew he needed to get to von der Tan and warn him. Barney knew he would have to figure out a way to get across the border through the army lines, at the same time keep the conspirators from doing likewise. Barney felt he could accomplish both goals by sneaking into the room next door while the 3 were asleep to steal the passes that Zellendorf had mentioned. Well, that he's going to go in there while they're asleep and steal the passes. We'll see how that works out. Barney did succeed in entering and grabbing some papers, but kicked a shoe on the way out. The noise woke everybody up. The 3 chased Barney down a dark hallway, and as he turned the corner, Barney stopped to plant a vicious blow on Mink. Barney can't defend himself. Barney could hear other pursuers coming upstairs, so he ducked into his own room, and then out the window he flew. As the others burst into the dark room, Barney dropped to a shed's roof and then to the ground to race through streets and alleys spurred forth by the sounds of pursuit. Barney came to a lighted street, but he dared not cross it because an Austrian sentry was on guard. He didn't want to be seen. With the sentry in front and pursuit getting closer from behind, Barney was about to make a dash for it. But he heard a voice from above calling to him in a whisper. The voice came from a woman who assisted Barney in climbing into a second floor window. Once he was in the dark room, she embraced him and called him Stefan. Barney informed her that he was not Stefan, but was a friend, and threw himself upon her mercy. She responded by sticking a gun in his ribs, ordering him into a locked room until this Stefan could return to determine what to do with Barney. So here we're not even in Lufta yet, but we've got three old friends, villains, and this unidentified woman with a gun and her buddy Stefan. Barney, exhausted, fell on a cot. He slept until daylight. At least he got some sleep out of the deal. In the morning, he heard voices coming up through a dumbwaiter shaft and realized the Austrian soldiers were speaking to the lady, saying they must search the house for a Serbian spy named Stefan Drontov. Well, she knows who Stefan is, but she's not telling these soldiers that. So to save her lover, that would be Stefan, the woman handed them a key and told them a man matching the description was in the attic room. Well, she's pointing them to Barney, and Barney knows this. Fortunately, he's heard all this. So to delay them, Barney jammed the cot against the door, then rearranged the furniture to reach a skylight. He is resourceful, I'll give him that. Mm-hmm. Up on the roof, Barney began leaping from rooftop to rooftop. When Barney reached the last building, he turned to check on his pursuers. At that moment, he stepped through a skylight, ouch, and landed amidst a captain and three other Austrian infantry officers sleeping in the same room. That was a wrong step. They all woke up, and once again, Barney was a prisoner. His pursuers also caught up and took charge of him, Barney the prisoner, telling the Austrian captain that this was Stefan Drontov, the famous spy. They said their prisoner would face the firing squad in just a few minutes. We don't mess around here. He's going to face the firing squad in just a few minutes. So that's all happens just in time for chapter 2 to end. That's end of chapter 2, condemned to death over in part 2. Any thoughts or comments from you all?
Well, you know, the girl who turns him in and says he's Stefan because she wants to save the real Stefan, that was a rotten thing for her to do, but I have a hard time thinking of her as an outright villain, since she is trying to save the man she's in love with. And it doesn't give her the right to throw an innocent man under the bus. So she's still in the wrong. But I can, you know, I can't make myself think of her as an outright villain. She's like somebody desperate to save the man she loves. And perhaps she's also a loyal Serbian, desperate to keep the Serbia's top spy free, and so makes that decision to sacrifice somebody else to keep Stefano, you know, free. So, looked at from her point of view, it's still ruthless, and I'm not justifying it, but I can't think of her as a villain. She was just somebody in a desperate situation trying to do the best she could.
Are you saying I should scratch her from my villain list?
Yeah, well, I don't know. It's a matter of it's a subjective opinion on my part, because what she did was still morally wrong. She shouldn't have done it. I just kind of can see her motivation. So, you know, who knows?
No, I got you. I appreciate the perspective. I'll start another list for her then.
Yeah, the sort of villain list.
The sort of villain. The villain to be determined later. How about that? All right. Any other insight or comments?
Just that I think that Burroughs is doing the same thing he did in part 1, which is keeps the action moving at a fast and furious pace, but uses it to give us insights into Barney's character and Mank's character along the way. So he does character building through action.
And while I was reading through this just now, I was really admiring the action, because you got Barney on the rooftop, you got Barney slugging people, you got Barney eluding people, you've got Barney blocking the door and scrambling through the skylight, and then finally Barney is able to grab a nap. The next thing you know, he's been accused of being someone else. He's going to face the firing squad. That is a mouthful.
It is.
But I'm glad you mentioned the observation about the young lady. I'll put her on the to be determined later list. So
okay,
I appreciate your perspective. Moving on into part 2, chapter 3. This is entitled "Before the Firing Squad." Once captured, Barney tried to convince an Austrian officer that he was an American newspaper correspondent and he was not a spy. He did have paperwork saying that, legitimate paperwork. The officer did not want to shoot at any Americans, but it still looked bad for Barney since he had tried to escape. And furthermore, Barney had 3 sets of stolen army passes in his possession. Now, that's a hard thing to explain. Where did these come from? The officer told Barney he had sent for Peter O'Blentz. Well, that's not going to help. which is one of the names on the passes to see if Peter knew who this guy Barney was. So Peter's not going to stick up for Barney, I don't think. This was bad news because Peter had only seen Barney once before without a beard. Yeah, I should note that Barney is clean shaven here. So Peter has only seen Barney once before without a beard. Also, Mink, the pain in the neck, was sure to recognize Barney, and it all proved true. All three, Peter, Mink, and Von Koblik, recognized Barney. But Mink rose to the occasion, saying that he personally knew Barney Custer, and he said that this guy is not Barney Custer. So Mink goes on to say, this guy is the spy. So you're shooting the right person, says Mink. That just sunk Barney's boat right there. Barney was sunk of the boat is my expression, for Barney's in deep trouble now. Barney was led through the streets by a military car to the place of execution over on the other side of town, where they lined you up against the wall and give you a blindfold and your last cigarette. When they reached the brick wall where the firing squad would aim, 20 or 30 prisoners were there also. Stand in line, wait your turn. Suddenly, the full reality of the situation dawned on Barney. The hero in him burst forth. He briefly considered seizing a rifle from one of the guards and opening fire at them. However, he reconsidered. Why should he kill any of these soldiers who were only doing their job? Besides, even if he killed one or two of them, he would soon be shot himself. So why take other lives? Yeah, but that's not going to get you out of there, buddy. He stood with the other, Barney stood with the other prisoners, bravely facing his death. He is a man of principle. We've established that. And I admire good principles. Bravely facing his death as the firing squad discharged a pair of volleys. A bullet found Barney, and he fell, with 3 or 4 bodies falling on top of him. The soldiers inspected their work and were convinced that everybody was dead. All the prisoners were dead. So the bodies were left laying about into the night. Soldiers go off to do whatever they do after an execution. After darkness settled, a thief appeared, then began pulling rings and wallets from the dead men. When he got to Barney and started to cut the ring off of Barney's finger, or pull it off the finger, the pain awakened our hero. Barney had indeed been hit by a bullet, but he was only grazed. Barney leaped to his feet, and scaring the looter, he raised a commotion that got the attention of nearby soldiers. Barney and the looter both ran, but the faster Barney was out of sight by the time the soldiers came, and so they ended up chasing only the looter. Barney heard shots fired along with a scream. The thief had been hit and was dying, but was conscious long enough to tell the soldiers about this firing squad survivor. In other words, the thief told them that Barney was still alive. That's just great. And now the soldiers are searching for Barney. In the dark, Barney accidentally kicked the manhole cover that made a noise that drew the soldiers near his position. Now, going through that open manhole, Barney slipped into the smelly cavern beneath. The soldiers passed overhead unknowingly, and Barney took off down the large underground trough in the hope it would lead to a river and at least temporary freedom and maybe clean water and a bath. That concludes part 2, chapter 3, entitled Before the Firing Squad. More action, more daring do. Any thoughts and comments?
I do think it's another important insight into Barney's character, that he did consider grabbing a rifle and going down fighting. And if, he might have done so if he thought there was honestly a chance of getting away, but as long as he was going to die anyway, he wasn't going to kill relatively innocent men along the way. And I think that's another insight into just how intensely moral and honest a person Barney is.
So I think that's very good insight. In fact, it inspires me to say that there might even be a moral message here. If you're true blue to the end, if you follow your principles and guides, and always be honest and do the right thing and not hurt innocent people like he considered doing, and as anyone would consider in that situation, that you'll be rewarded for it. I think that's the moral message. I'm not about to say that things work out that way in real life, but I think overall it's a good rule of thumb to follow. Drastic circumstances sometimes call for drastic means, but I won't get into all that. But my point is, I think that's the lesson that Burroughs may be trying to tell us here. It's an interesting twist, I'll say that.
It is.
And then to have, because you think, gee whiz, we've lost our hero. Now what are we going to do? And then thank goodness that thief came along and started tugging on the ring. that woke Barney up, and he got out of that situation. All right. If nothing else, let's move into.
Oh, I just want to
Go
make
ahead,
a
go ahead.
comment backing up to the previous chapter there. When it's mentioned about not wanting to execute an American and stuff like that. Well, one of the things, if you want to say it works well for the World War I background, it started out very much tribal bloodline warfares. So in Luther, having the families like you do, and then the war front, Austria, Hungary, and that, it was very much about long simmering feuds for the last 500 years on who had what land and why, and who was forced to live where. And that just comes out where they're not as interested in including someone from far off. They're more, they'd be more interested in taking out or capturing or hurting someone who is an age-old enemy.
Mhm.
Yeah, they also, nobody wanted America to come in, or the United States to come in on somebody on the enemy side. So at this early point in the war, the Austrians would have had good reason for not wanting to get the Americans mad at them.
Yeah.
Good point. Good point. And also over in the States, there was an isolationist movement that was pretty strong for a while. Of course, it faded away as USA finally did get into World War One. But all right, anything else?
No.
I don't think so.
All right. While I'm thinking of it, let me be sure to mention, recommend the ERB webcomics at www.edgarriceburroughs.com. Mad King is one of the comics there, and be sure to check it out. Beautiful artwork, great writing, and it really enhances the story. So I highly recommend Mad King at the ERB webcomics. And now back to our story with part 2, chapter 4, A Race to Luther. When Barney dropped into that smelly sewer, the stream of moving water was 2 to 3 inches deep. And as he moved along and the conduit dropped lower, it was soon halfway up to his knees. He continued on, with a flowing stream of filth and garbage climbing up to above his knees. It's not getting any better here. He went as fast as he could out of fear that deadly gas might cause him to lose consciousness. With the water down up to his chin and the top of his head scraping the roof, it seemed Barney could continue no longer. Barney lost his footing, plunged beneath the flow, only to bob up a few seconds under a starlit sky. He had found the river. Barney had survived just by the nick of his teeth. Barney had found the river, but Barney also found more soldiers. He could hear their voices and see them walking their beat along the darkened river, but they didn't see him, and Barney swam for the opposite shore. Barney clambered down the river, rested, then set off through the woods, but nonetheless ran into an Austrian sentry who challenged him. Thinking quickly, Barney pretended to be a drunk with a bottle that he was willing to share. And the sentry was tempted, allowing Barney to get close enough to grab his gun and then get his hands around his throat. Like the firing squad soldiers, Barney realized this soldier was only doing his job, but Barney continued to squeeze the fellow's neck until he was sure he was dead. No moral discussion here. And then Barney switched clothes to put the soldier's body into the river. On he moved, and this time Barney was in uniform. As he made his way, Barney saw a sentry but avoided detection. Shortly after that, the sentry moved away, and Barney fell in with the detail that stopped there to relieve the sentry. So Barney's blending in, so to speak. He marched back with the contingent to the barracks, where Barney slipped away but found no escape. In every direction he went, Barney saw an Austrian sentry and began to think the world was full of Austrian sentries. He eventually found a vacant horse barn and fell asleep. Barney awoke to the noise of many men and machines and saw the large contingent of troops setting up a camp right in front of the shed in which he hid. But Barney's eyes were mostly on the great high-powered machines that chugged and purred around him. Barney has a thing for vehicles, and he felt that behind the wheel of one of those, he might have a chance of making it to the border. Barney decided boldness would be the best way to get a car. Lesson learned, act like you belong there. Barney strode from the shed in his Austrian uniform and walked into a building that was a hub of military activity. His only purpose in going in was to be seen coming out and not seem suspicious, so he went to a car and started it up. The sentry in the building asked him to state his business, and Barney came up with a fictitious name for a general he wanted to see. The sentry didn't know that general, was about to ask a sergeant, when Barney looked outside, told the sentry he saw the general he was looking for. Then Barney left. Barney went straight to the car, started it, and drove out of the compound. He drove through the town along the road towards Serbia unchallenged. For much of the way, Barney drove the car in a center lane with marching soldiers on his right-hand side. At a fork in the road, the soldiers were turning to the left, and Barney, once again, acting like he belongs there, needed to get through their lines in order to turn to the right. So with boldness, Barney tooted his horn, saluted the officer, and pointed to the other fork. The officer held up the troops while Barney drove through. Act like you belong. And that concludes the Race to Lutha, Part 2, Chapter 4. Comments and thoughts?
I love this chapter because I can see this working in the confusion of an army advancing in the war, and everything is movement and constant. No matter how well organized an army is, there's going to be an element of confusion to it. So just by pretending you belong and driving off casually in the car, I can see that working. It's a wonderful plan, and it's completely believable.
I was reminded during all of this, I didn't double check it, although I think I used to know Star Wars very well. I was reminded of the sequence, I believe, in Return of the Jedi, where Han Solo, Chewbacca, Luke, and Leia in a stolen Imperial shuttlecraft are making their way to probably the forest moon of Endor. And they've got security codes that may be old, but they think they'll get them inside. And Chewbacca's piloting, and he says something to Han, something like, in Chewbacca language, naturally, Wookiee language, something like, how should I drive? And Han goes, I don't know, fly casual. So this
but don't look like you're flying casual. It's just
right.
Yeah.
And then I've thankfully I've never done any of these shenanigans, but I've certainly heard the phrase "act like you belong." And if you're like you're a meeting, for example, I have been in meetings with company bigwigs, and always act like you belong was always a good rule of thumb to follow. All right, moving now into Part 2, Chapter 5. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Jess. There's one other thing I wanted to know. We once again see evidence of a immutable rule of the universe is when you knock out or kill an enemy soldier to take his uniform, the uniform will always fit.
Yes, exactly. I was watching Wild Wild West the other day, and the rule applies there too.
Yeah.
That's good. That's very true. It does save time, and it saves having to knock out multiple people. All right. Anything else?
That was it.
That was a good one. All right. We are now in Part 2, Chapter 5, entitled The Traitor King. While Barney sped towards the Austrian-Lutheran border, King Leopold of Lutha was having a few choice words with Prince Ludwig von der Tan. Ludwig von der Tan, as you know, is one of the last good guys left in Lutha, and King Leopold has exposed his dark side. So they're having this discussion. So we have established that Lutha is, we've said, rotten, selfish, and a little snot. And in my laundry list here, I said that Leopold is a man with a weak mind, has no moral compass, and is easily manipulated by others. Now, as proof of this last point, easily manipulated. Even though Peter of Blentz, whom we know to be a bad guy, kept King Leopold in prison for several years, preventing Leopold from doing his job as king on the throne, Leopold was talked into pardoning Peter, the guy who had kept him subdued all these years. So that's why I say weak-minded. Well, when Prince Ludwig von der Tan cautioned King Leopold against such behavior, Leopold turned the tables on him, criticized Prince Ludwig, and accused Ludwig of having aspirations for the throne himself. Can you imagine that? The guy is trying to help him. Leopold is fussing at him. So Leopold doesn't know one end from the other. Burroughs tells us that Prince Ludwig was noble and dignified man, had only the best interests of Luther at heart. He's established that with his behavior, And we know it's true because I said this much early on when we were talking about villains. Prince Ludwig reminded King Leopold that his family had always supported the Reuben-Roth, that's Barney's family, family's rule, as long as the reigning monarch was loyal to the country and people of Lutha. Sounds equitable. Ludwig also warned the king that there were evil forces at work, and he means evil forces that are bigger than Leopold. And this is all this activity going on in other countries as World War I is about to break out. People are jockeying for position. Evil forces are bigger than anyone in Lutha. As I said, these other countries just outside are jockeying for position. And Lutha probably is a shortcut to someplace. These evil forces had their eye on capturing the country Lutha for themselves. They are so dire that even Peter of Blentz, our favorite villain, who already cannot be trusted, would be cast aside should these evil forces take over. Leopold scoffed at all this. He didn't believe it, and he switched the subject over to Emma. He wanted to talk about the girl. King Leopold demanded that von der Tan compel his daughter, Emma, to marry him. But Ludwig responded that it was Emma's decision. This infuriated Leopold even more. He was angry. He went so far as to hint that perhaps von der Tan was conspiring to place the impostor, that's Barney, on the throne so Emma could marry the king of her choice. Really not a bad idea. This upset Ludwig when he heard all this. Ludwig told King Leopold that no one, not even the king, could speak to von der Tan that way. And so in a temper tantrum, Leopold, like a spoiled child who didn't get his way, grew more ruffled and told von der Tan to get out. Outside the door, listening to the argument, was Count Zellerndorf, another bad guy. He greeted von der Tan with fake warmth, but told von der Tan that he had no doubt where Zellerndorf greeted von der Tan with fake warmth. That told von der Tan, I've got a word wrong here, that told von der Tan that there was no doubt as to where Zellerndorf really stood. As you might recall, we have already established that Count Zellerndorf of Austria has worked behind the scenes against Leopold of Lutha and in favor of Peter of Blentz and his evil associates. Put Zellerndorf on your villain list. Zellerndorf entered the king's chamber and began his litany of soothing lies aimed to feed the king's ego while painting von der Tan as one out to get control of the throne by any means possible. So he's telling the king what the king wants to hear. First, though, he told the king that the impostor was executed in Austria. So at least that, and they're all thinking that's Barney. So at least that direct threat was out of the way. But as we know, Barney survived the firing squad, just barely. Next, he proposed that the king accept an invitation to visit Peter of Blentz for a week, thus proving to the people of Lutha that the king was his own man and was not afraid to visit his old enemy and not controlled by Prince Ludwig. And so Leopold left for Blentz to visit Peter, and no sooner was he gone than a unit of the Austrian army entered Lutha. I would call this an occupation force from another country. Mm-hmm. Word came to von der Tan, who was enraged at this violation of Lutha's neutrality. Von der Tan rode to Lustadt to bring word to Leopold, only to find out that Leopold had gone to Blentz. Instead, von der Tan conferred with the Serbian emissary, and they agreed that Count Zellerndorf of Austria was the brain behind getting the king out of the way so the army could come in, the occupation force I mentioned, so the army could come in unchallenged. Von der Tan, with a small party of soldiers, rode to Blentz to warn the king, but on the outskirts of town, he was halted by an Austrian sentry, which enraged von der Tan to be thwarted by a representative of a foreign power in Lutha. The men with him were not large enough force to blast past the guards to get to the castle, so they backed off. Ludwig had to turn back. But it does raise the question of what's an army from Austria doing, telling you about where you can and cannot go inside Lutha. And that's where we end with part 2, chapter 5, The Traitor King. Thoughts and comments?
It's just, Burroughs does an excellent job of keeping us straight on all of this. There's a number of characters who are double-crossing each other. Leopold's, I mean, it's just, he is a little snot. And I think that his main failing is that he is so selfish himself that he cannot see honorable selflessness in others. he doesn't recognize the honorable behavior of Von der Tan or of Barney because he himself would never act with honor towards another person. So he doesn't recognize it in other people. And that makes him easy for the bad guys to manipulate. And so
He was
very
also, excuse me, he was also, though, kept more or less a prisoner
yeah,
for some 10 years and possibly fed all kinds of garbage during that time.
that's true. Yeah, I mean, if you look at his background, maybe it's possible to feel a little sympathy for him, but he's literally unable to recognize somebody acting in an honorable fashion.
Oh, definitely. He is a problem.
Outside, it's an alien concept to him.
Right.
I mean,
however he got to this point, he is a problem. You're exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be interesting to get a little more backstory on him too, just because how was he raised as a kid? You know, maybe he didn't know a lot of any people with honorable intentions. And Emma told a little story about when he came with his dad to visit her father and met there, and things there as just a small meeting seemed fairly reasonable and natural, but it would be interesting to hear more things before he's imprisoned.
Mm-hmm. It would be. So Scott, you were going to take over with chapters 6 through 10.
Yep, and it starts off chapter 6. Trap is sprung. I'm going to try and keep this as linear as possible. As you said, Burroughs does a good job when you're reading about keeping us aware of who is who, but in doing this, he's gearing up for the ending that you'll take on. There's a lot of people running around doing a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So so at this point, the Austrians have surrounded the castle, and there's a lot of unknowns in the air. And Ludwig sends one of his men, an officer, over to see if Leopold's okay or if he's like a prisoner with the troops, and if you want to call them the enemy or whatever, the troops being around there. And he says if he doesn't hear anything back in 24 hours, then he's going to continue moving on with plans that he's making, assuming that Leopold's a prisoner. And then he also meets with military and some of the people from the surrounding areas, like the minister from Serbia, to strengthen his side, for which he's trying to help the country, not be taken over by enemy force. And then at the same point, now people like Peter and Zellendorf are in the castle in the area with Luther there, and they are telling him some half-truths, truths, non-truths, trying to keep him occupied, in his mind occupied, and hoping that he will side more with them and take out other people like Ludwig and maybe have them arrested or arrested for treason in that area. And that's when they decide to mention that maybe he should force the father or force Emma to marry him. That this point with his powers as king and maybe war powers and everything's going on, to give her no choice. So she is at the home castle, and several men come and tell her that her father has had a stroke, not a real bad stroke, but that she should come and be with him. So she leaves with them, and these are people who are being sent or overlooked by Mank, but she doesn't know at that time. And as they're going through the woods, and going from one trail to another, she knows which way would be the right when they kind of come to a Y in the forest. And there's already a contingent of guards there. They won't let her through. And then she finds out that she's actually, if you want to call it, being escorted. Yeah, I don't think they say she's a prisoner, but escorted to the castle to see Leopold. And she figures out this is all dealing with the politics and what may or may happen to her dad, and she's sure her marriage is involved and all that. She knows these woods quite well, so she reaches a point where she knows she can go off on her horse and know the trail, but it's a very old trail covered up. Most people don't know it, and the guard would have a hard time keeping up with her. So she, at that point, takes the horse and puts it in a charge up through the woods to do an escape, and a couple of guards continue chasing her, and their horses are they got good control rapport with their horses, so they're able to stay fairly close to her. And she gets to a part where there's a very high fence with the wires running up high that she can't jump through. She finally is able to pull the wires down and walk her horse through and get up. But at that time, one of the guards catches up with her, and just as he's gonna pull her down and get her on the ground and off the horse to take her back, he gets attacked from a guy who jumps out of woods and knocks him out. That is chapter 6.
I love how we see that Emma has both courage and intelligence in this chapter. You know, she
Yes.
recognizes what's going on. She comes up with a plan. She has the physical courage to carry out that plan. You know, if it hadn't been for that wire fence, she would have made a clean getaway on her own.
Yeah.
But you know, and so Burroughs, I think the general perception is that his ladies are always needing to get rescued, and they do need to get rescued a lot. But they're almost always intelligent, capable, brave women. They're not just helpless, screaming damsels in distress. They never are.
No,
They always have strong personalities and courage and brains.
and he's written a share of men who need to be rescued and helped too. So
That's true. Yeah.
it's not out of balance. Any other thoughts?
Nothing for me.
Yeah. Nothing for me.
Okay, that brings us to chapter 7 of part 2, Barney to the rescue. It turns out, we jump right here, that it's Barney Custard who knocks the guard out and is rescuing her. But first, the chapter gives a little more backstory or about him coming through, leaving Austria and getting into Lutha, and things are going pretty good till he sees an encampment of other soldiers milling around, and one officer is like, "Hey, stop!" You know, and he's acting like, "Oh no, I'm just here. I'm just going through," and goes through another line of guards, and they open up fire on him then, because they're like, "Wait a minute, you're supposed to stop," and they aren't so sure that he's a fellow troop, and they open up on the car, which ends up putting a hole in the radiator, I believe. So the car conks out after a while, and they've also are coming, still looking for him, and that way. And he puts the car goes off through a railing on a road or bridge into the river running nearby, and the car goes in deep enough so that it's covered up, and he figures if they see the cars down there, they will think maybe he got hurt or drowned in that, but it's deep enough that they may stay on the road and just keep on going. So he cuts up through
Yeah, through the
up
woods.
into the woods, and
Mhm.
that's where he Yeah, and that's where he ends up hearing voices, and he's wondering what's going on, and he gets curious enough then because realizes it sounds like a soldier uh, with a lady, and that's when he jumps in, knocks guard out, and then sees that it's Emma because he didn't know it was her at first, and it takes her a minute to realize who he is, and then they spend about a week and they're trying to keep hidden but make their way to the area they know or be safer. And he also changes out clothes. And when they come by a farmhouse and clothes that are on a washing line, because he figures he's probably already taken off, I believe, part of uniform, but he figures at this point having a Austrian troop uniform on will make him stand out and put him in more danger than having civilian clothes on. And actually, he put the clothes on before he ran into her. That's why I said some of the things are going through my head here. And so he rescues her at that point. So it was actually he's alone in the woods till he meets up with her, which is about a week after the car chase. That's chapter 7.
Yeah, I think it's important to mention when he takes the clothes off the clothesline to change out of the uniform, he actually does leave some money behind. So
But
again,
yeah,
another little reminder of his chronic honesty.
integrity.
Yeah, and I tried to find out, this was published in 1915. I tried to find out if this might have been the first ever car chase in literature. Um,
Huh.
I could not find a definite reference on it. The first ever aerial dogfight in literature was published the year before in 1914 in a novel called The Lone Wolf by Louis Joseph Vance. But I
Okay.
could not find a reference to the first ever car chase.
Is
And
there one in Around the World in 80 Days?
not a car chase, no. In fact, I do
Okay.
not remember for sure them using a
I'm
car.
not sure, but I know that
I don't
you
think they use a car
different
in that.
vehicles and things. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think they used a car in that one.
Yeah.
But he's being pursued, after he drives out of the camp, he's being pursued by other guys in a car. So in cars. So it's a car chase. It may very well be the first one in literature. But
that'd be something. You piqued my curiosity. I'm gonna do some searches too to find out.
Mhm.
Yeah, my curiosity is up too. I'm searching as we speak.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt that movies had probably done some car chases, but had they showed up in prose fiction yet? I don't
Right.
know.
Yeah, literature and prose fiction goes back before movies, so that's
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I'm bemoaning the loss of Barney's second car. I like these roadsters.
I know
just
he's
crashed them.
hard. He's hard on cars, isn't he?
Yeah.
So,
Remind me not to loan him one. Although he'd probably pay you for it if it got wrecked.
now, if Barney Cutter asked to borrow your car, just say no, because you'll never see it again otherwise. So,
Yeah, I was grieving during that chapter when he crashed the car or ran it over the side of the hill.
yeah, because Burroughs, I don't know if Burroughs, I get the feeling from this he might have liked cars because
He did. I'm confident he did. There's some
Yeah.
pictures of him with vehicles and vehicles. Well, really of any era. I mean, it's a source of pride.
yeah.
But my impression is that he liked cars. They took that road trip, maybe more than one, from
That's
from
true.
Chicago
So,
to California.
So he's showing his love of cars in this novel because Barney is kind of swooning over how cool this car is as well while he's driving.
If I'm remembering correctly, is in this chase where they talk about he pushes the speedometer up to 60 miles an hour, which back then was fast. I mean,
yeah. So,
Well, and on some of these mountain roads, there's going to be curves and you're sometimes narrow. You may not see what's coming at you. It may not be on the right side of the road. It could be a goat out there in the middle of the road, something like that.
mhm.
So doing 60 miles an hour is, I think, very dangerous, more so than it might be today on those roads.
I'm sure.
Yeah. So,
But that's that thrill of speed, though. I mean, it gets you.
mhm.
Be hard on those wheels too. The
Yeah.
wheels weren't made for that.
Okay.
Yeah, they didn't have steel belted radial tires either.
Mhm. And
So,
oh, Jess, just to let you know, the night we're recording this, it's just hit 10:45. You had something
I'm good.
you had to bail. Oh, you're good? Okay, thank you.
I'm good.
Okay.
Got taken care of. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So we're up to chapter 8, right, Scott?
yep, chapter 8, and that one's called An Adventurous Day. And this is when he realizes it's Wilma and Wilma or Wilma.
Emma.
Gee, I've not been watching the Flintstones.
Yeah,
Emma.
it's Buster and Wilma. It's-
Yeah, it's a new Burroughs adventure,
mhm.
alternate universe. Doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. But sorry, my head's a little goofy tonight.
Mhm.
And and he takes the from the soldier, takes his weapons, and Emma at first thinks he might actually be Leopold, but then realizes that is Barney, and another soldier is pursuing him, coming after him, and he ends up shooting him down. And Emma, he's helping Emma get away too. And she also shoots and takes some people out. Again, you're talking about the Iron Maiden here.
Mhm.
So they continue going on and make it to a village. Luststadt is the name of the town. And they go into town, get some food, get something to eat, and maybe a place where they can sleep for the night. One of the people in the village gets suspicious of who they are or why, wondering why they're there. And sure enough, it's not long after that, Manx men are back in town looking for them and trying to find them out. They are hiding off to the side, going between the buildings and bushes and stuff like that. And they hear Mank out there, and that he's giving different orders to the soldiers. And that's when Barney does, well, he left money for the clothes, but at this point they're trying to stay alive. So he gets a car, steals a car, and they get out of town. And the men, the soldiers, or the guards, king's guards, whatever you want to call them, are chasing after them on horses like that. And while they're driving away, Emma shoots back and kills one of those guys too. And then it's just got to be Custer's luck. They run out of gas. And that's chapter 8.
And I thought that was a wonderful way to end that chapter. It wasn't something you were expecting. It's almost an anticlimax, but it works so well. Just they were making this awesome getaway, and oh, wait a minute, the car's out of gas.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and we see more about how awesome Emma is. She actually has some dialogue after she kills one of the bad guys. She says, I have shot a man. I've often wondered what the sensation must be to have done such a thing. I should feel terribly, but I don't. They were firing at you, trying to shoot you in the back while you were defenseless. I'm not sorry. I cannot be. I only wish it had been Captain Mank. Nobody likes Captain Mank, but Emma's just awesome. She is. I don't know. It seems every time I read a Burroughs novel, the lady in it is my new favorite Burroughs lady.
Yeah.
So because Emma just is. She's an exceptional lady.
I will add that there's Edgar Rice Burroughs Inc. on their T-shirt selection. There's a Mad King T-shirt, and there's a fine-looking picture of Emma there, tastefully done, I might add, with Barney, I presume, in the red uniform, his red beard and the sword going. But it's a very nice likeness. I would recommend taking a look at that T-shirt.
Cool. Okay, so we're up to chapter 9.
Maybe that's the one I'll order.
Oh, take a look.
So now we're on chapter 9 called The Capture. Of course, car's out of gas, and the guards are coming up on them and capture them. And then, of course, Mink comes there too. So now they're taken, and they're going to be turned over or brought before the king in Blentz. When Leopold, when the king sees Barney, he goes into a rage because he was under the understanding that Barney was dead. And now he finds out he's alive. He's also with Emma. Emma despises Leopold more than ever now. And Leopold's not happy. So they put him into different quarters, apartments side by side, and Barney is locked in the room that he swung out from with the rope to the window with the secret passage up above. So he is he knows about secret passage, so he's able to use that and walk around and be able to listen in on the king talking about what they're going to do, and about wanting to have Emma brought over to him. And then but he comes in the room and makes the king change clothes and identities, telling him, well, no, it's telling him, but he's doing it to, to save her and spread more confusion if he can about it. And
I think, I just think we should mention that he was put in the same room he was held prisoner with in part 1, and that's how he knows about the secret passage. So
yeah,
it was
part one,
a wonderful bit of plotting that, it makes perfect sense because they never knew he got away through a secret passage. So
No.
it all makes perfect sense, and it's just a wonderful plot twist.
Well, because he got away on that going through the moat, but Joseph and Emma got away through the secret passage, but he knew about it. So
Yeah.
that was all good. Yeah, it is. Like you said, I should have mentioned it was in the first part because that connects to stories there, because they say it's been a couple of years since he's been there that have passed. So, and then he's wondering, Leopold may or may not convince the other bad guys like Peter and stuff. Yeah, he's not Custer or is Custer. All that kind of confusion. Is this going to work when it is not going to work, et cetera, et cetera. Then they say that they've brought Emma to him, and he turns her away and makes him, or tells him to send her back. And at this point, he makes Leopold write a pardoning him instead of hanging him for treason at dawn or wherever it may be. And he's able to take that, and along the way he gets Emma back, and she's thinking it's Leopold and says if he won't be executed, she'll agree to marry Leopold, but it's Barney. So Barney shows her the pardon and says, I think we better get out of here. And they have the pardon with them, and they get some horses from one of the officers or guardsmen there, and leaves the pardon with the officer at the gate. So he's got proof of that. And then they take off. He also ties up the officer so he can't go off and do other stuff. And at that point, he and Emma take off, and that's the end of chapter 9.
Yeah, it's just another great chapter. So once again, it's Burroughs' skill at storytelling, because there's a lot of stuff going on.
A lot.
Especially with Barney, like making this up as he's going along. So he, takes the king to the other room and sends for Emma, then realizes he needs the king to write a pardon, so he has to send Emma away, and so on and so forth. he's thinking on his feet. He doesn't think of everything the first time around, but he's able to improvise well and keep everything going until he can get away with Emma. Um, so so he and Emma are getting away, and the king is now a prisoner with the bad guys thinking he's Barney.
Yeah.
And it's to Barney's credit that he leaves that pardon behind, because that was in part to save the king's life, even though he's got no reason to want to help
Yeah.
him.
Yeah, it does with that pardon. They can't execute him by mistake.
Mhm.
So he's also they get out without as much problem because he's heard some of the people talking before and overhears passwords that can be used for coming and going. And so they get out and ride for a while. And now Emma's trying to figure out if it's the king, if it's Barney. She's getting pretty confused at this time. And they end up back at Lustadt, where they had stolen the car from. And there are other troops there, but they're I'm going to say Luthanian troops, troops for Lutha. And Butzo is commanding them. He's running the business there with that military, and he doesn't recognize them. Doesn't recognize that it's Barney right away, and he's working on trying to figure out the Austrian, where the soldiers are. The troops are moving around within and out, and there have been offers from Serbia to help them out. And at this point, then Barney also steps in and takes the troops and gives them instructions and orders to find Emma's father, to find Ludwig, and get to him and get him information immediately. And let's see, I think they talked to a Serbian delegate and say they could use his help if he brings some of his soldiers in to go against the Austrians. And then Zellendorf is given orders also to get the Austrians, those troops, out of Lutha within a day or 24 hours. And that pretty much closes up chapter 10, A New King in Lutha, on part 2.
Yeah. So like in chapter 1, like in part 1, we see Barney forced to pretend he's the king when he doesn't want to, but doing a superb job as king. You know, he makes the situation clear. He says, we are going to ally with the Serbians. The Austrians got to get out, and rallies the army, does everything a good king should do in this situation. So he's just continues to prove himself to be a better king than the real king.
Yeah. No surprise.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to do the last few chapters. Chapter 11 is the battle, and we get another epic battle. You know, Lutha has declared war on Austria. They are allied with the Serbians. They call it volunteers for the army. The populace is very enthusiastic about kicking the Austrians out. I think most of the average people realize if the Austrians come in, Lutha is never going to have its independence again. And the battle's fought with Barney right there at the front line. He is defending against the Austrian forces. He's outnumbered and things start to look bad, but then the Serbians finally arrive. And Barney leads a charge from one flank of the army. And with the Serbians there, the Austrians are soon in retreat. And the battle is won and the Austrians are kicked out of Lutha. In the meantime, a messenger comes from Blentz, the castle where the Leopold is being held prisoner under the assumption that he's Barney. Peter knows that his plans are up because he was siding with the Austrians. He knows he's doomed, so he's decided to ignore the pardon that Barney had forced the king to write, and he's going to execute, quote unquote, the American at dawn in order to curry favor with the Austrians. So this message comes to Emma, who goes to speak to the king. And remember, Emma thinks that Barney is Leopold. But Barney finally says, nope, I'm not Leopold, I'm Barney. And for the first time in the story, I think he gets someone to believe him pretty quickly. You know? He's able to like tell her some things that happened while they were alone, and she realizes, oh, you are Barney. And he says, yeah, but don't worry, I'm going to rescue the king. And then we're going to force him to give his blessing so that you and I can get married. And, you know, this is the weirdest proposal in the world, but Emma says yes. So in the meantime, back in Castle Blentz, Leopold is desperately trying to convince everybody that he's Leopold. He's having the same trouble that Barney had throughout most of the part one. He can't get anybody to believe who he is. You know, and so he's just in terror of his life. He's showing none of the courage that Barney felt. When they learn in Castle Blentz that the Austrians are defeated, you know, Leopold's questioned about, hey, how did you turn, you know, how did you, Barney, turn the king's favor away from Austria? And he's just saying, I'm not Barney, I'm Leopold. No one will believe me. Barney, in the meantime, arrives at the castle with Betzow. They're unsuccessful in obtaining the prisoner's release, though. And they ride away, and at the end of chapter 12, Leopold is being taken out from his cell and put against the wall in front of a firing squad. Any comments on those chapters from you guys?
I think they need a fingerprint expert on staff.
They do. Yes. That would have changed the situation enormously, wouldn't it? Except somebody probably would have mixed up the fingerprints at some point.
Yeah, you probably couldn't trust the guy reading the fingerprints.
Yeah. So Barney, Betzow, and 20 troops. Remember, they have knowledge of the secret passageways that apparently run all through Blentz Castle. I'm surprised there's any load-bearing walls left in this castle. There's so many. So Barney, Betzow, and 20 troopers sneak in, and they get there just before Leopold is executed. And there's a battle. And in that battle, Barney's shot in the breast and wounded, and the king is wounded in the left leg. But the bad guys are defeated. Peter and Mank are put under house arrest. And Barney's wound isn't that bad. He's alone with Leopold. And he gives him the terms. I love this. He's got no respect for Leopold at all. He calls him Leo, and just says, look, you're an idiot. This is what's going to happen. You know, you're going to return. You're going to get your identity back. You're going to be king, but you're going to give me Emma to marry, or you're going to give her permission to marry me. And resigned to this is inevitable. Leopold, you know, writes up the documents that Barney wants to do all this. And satisfied, Barney does what I don't think is that bright a thing. He goes to sleep in the same room with Leopold. Any comments on that? The only thing I'll add is it was another really cool action scene, the fight in front of with the firing squad.
Yeah, he's got everything moving quickly to come up to finish up the story. There's a lot of things going on with a lot of people. It's a lot of action.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it reads fast.
Yep. Now in chapter
it's rushing to a climax. Go ahead.
It is. Yeah, in chapter 14, Burroughs does kind of a neat thing here. He describes one of the two getting up. He doesn't actually overtly say that it's Leopold. I think most readers will guess that it's Leopold very quickly because he's not acting in a very honorable manner. He thinks about killing the other guy in his sleep, which is not something Barney would do. But he just keeps that little bit of doubt there about which one of this is for a few pages. And it's kind of a neat narrative trick, I think. but he's unable, just because because he's a coward. In this case, it prevents him from committing murder, but he's just unable to force himself to do that. But he takes all the papers he drew up and he leaves. And he's able to find a servant there who he pays to murder Barney for him. He doesn't have the guts to do it himself, but he can pay someone else to murder Barney. He gets away from Blentz. In the meantime, Mank reports to Peter that the person they think is Barney has escaped. And Peter sends Mank to Lutstoud to see if they can just get any advantage out of this. In the meantime, the servant who was paid to murder Barney builds a coffin and digs a hole, and he enters the castle with a sharp axe. And then we jump back. Burroughs is doing the trick he often does, which he jumps back from one point of view to another to keep the tension high. In the meantime, back in Lutstad, everybody's talking about how brave the king was, but then the real Leopold shows up, and he, he sends a note to Emma that he's saying that the real king died, and that Barney is going to keep his identity in the throne, and that he and Emma can get married right now. So he's now he's Leopold pretending to be Barney, pretending to be Leopold, and using this to trick Emma into marrying him. And Emma goes along with this, even though she's confused by the note, which doesn't seem to be in character for Barney. The announcement is made public that they're going to get married right away. But at the ceremony, both Emma and Betzow see his limp. They know that the king, not Barney, was wounded in the leg during the fight. And they both realize that something's wrong. Emma pretends to faint to prevent the wedding ceremony from being consummated. And Betzow carries her out with the king and the bishop and Emma's dad following. There's chapter 14. I actually love that. Now that I said it aloud, Leopold is pretending to be Barney, pretending to be Leopold. I just love the way Burroughs set this up. So any comments on that chapter from you guys?
Well, this whole book, or much of it, is a case of mistaken identity. It's beautifully handled by Burroughs, no question about that. But I'm thinking also, while we're going through this, I was just thinking about several other programs, television, movies, books, where we've also had cases of mistaken identity. And I think and there's a couple Star Trek episodes that come to mind, but there's others, plenty of others. But I think in each instance, when you see that you've got an exact duplicate of somebody, a pair of twins here, let's say, and you need to tell them apart. If there's any way to mark one of them, not harmfully, I don't mean that, but some way that cannot be removed. I don't know, piece of a paint stripe or something that cannot be easily removed. I would do that as soon as possible. Ideally before the confusion develops. This limp is the dead giveaway, so to speak.
Yeah,
but something like that. But we've gone the entire book here without that kind of identifying factor.
Mm-hmm. So chapter 15, we've got Prince Peter's arrested and sent to Lutstow. Mank gets into the capital undetected, and he goes to the cathedral, and he gets into the room where the king and Emma and Betzow and several other people are, and he shoots. And then Burroughs again cuts away before we know who gets shot. We go to a flashback to several hours before, back to Blentz, where Barney's about to get axed to death by that servant, but he avoids that. He ties the guy up. He discovers that Leopold is gone, realizes what he must be up to. He gets a horse, races back to Lutstow. We find out afterwards that he sees Mank sneaking into the castle and follows him climbing through the same window. So Mank shoots the king, shoots Leopold, thinking he's Barney. Betzow shoots Mank, and then Barney shows up and says, "No, don't worry, I'm still alive." Mank, as he dies, still doesn't know who's who. He points at the dead king and says, that man's not the king, and points at Barney and says, that man is the king. Barney explains the last minute changes of identity. Emma realizes they can get married now. Nobody's sorry that Leopold is dead, which is kind of understandable. And Ludwig says to Barney, you have no choice. You have the Ribbentrop family blood in you. You've got to be king, but you're going to be crowned as Barney Custer. You're going to be King Barney the First, I guess. So he doesn't have to pretend anymore, which is good for Barney's innate honesty. But he is stuck being the king, whether he wants to be or not. And just a very short chapter 16 where he is crowned. He marries Emma. He elevates Betzow in rank. And he becomes the first decent ruler that Luther has had in over a generation. And thus the novel comes to an end. Any last comments on this bit? Bits from you guys? I got to say, the way Burroughs kept flashing back at just the right moments to keep the tension up was beautifully done. It's a great ending to the novel.
Really good cliffhanger endings. I mean, you want to find out what's going, and a lot of times the next chapter,
Yeah.
you realize, oh wait, this is going with Emma now, or whoever, and so you got to get through that chapter to the next one to find out what happened previously. He does a really good job of those segments that way.
He does, yes.
It's a satisfying ending, and even though being a Burroughs book, you kind of expect it to be a happy ending, but gee whiz, it's not impossible that the book would end on some kind of a cliffhanger. It's going to take you to another book where you've got to have more adventures for you to figure out what's going to happen. And people do die in these stories as we've stated.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead. I think I interrupted you, Tim.
Oh, I was just going to say that I had mentioned that I hadn't read this particular one for decades until I reread it for the podcast. And I had a vague memory of Barney becoming king, but doing so by still pretending to be Leopold. But I realized that the ending that Burroughs gave us, when I remembered how he actually ended with Barney being able to become king in his own identity, was much more appropriate, because we always have to remember that Barney is an incredibly honest and honorable man. He pretended to be Leopold only when he absolutely had to save the day. And I don't think he ever would have been satisfied with spending the rest of his life living a lie. That he was able to become king honestly was the appropriate ending for him. So, any last comments from you guys on the book?
I think it was well done. Really enjoyed it. First time I've looked at it in its entirety in quite a while. I've gone through pieces of it, but from front to back is the first read I've given it a while. Always loved the story, and I loved it even more so. As I've said in my discussion group, and I've probably said here in this forum, that perspective changes over time, and we've all got our favorites from years ago. And the true test of time is when those favorites are even more enjoyable at this age of our life, and they are. What Burroughs books are.
Yeah.
So, and I always loved them, and I'm enjoying them even more this day. This year is a fine example of that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I enjoyed this immensely. Like I said, I thought it was a little dry or something when I read it, like 40 years ago. I forgot how much swashbuckling was in there, and I like all the Burroughs books. I'd really like to see this one on screen. I guess I should quit saying that every show, but it's true. It's good material. It's perfect for a movie or a limited series.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that in part one, that it would be great as a miniseries, and I think you're right. Somebody needs to call Netflix or HBO and put this out to them, because this would be, maybe a 12-part series or something, and you could do the story very faithfully, and just have a lot of fun on screen.
Someone who could handle a sword like Errol Flynn or Basil Rathbone, one of my favorites, would have been extraordinary with this.
Yeah,
I can see Basil Rathbone as Mank.
Yeah,
well,
Basil Rathbone would be great as Mank.
He could. He could do that.
Yeah. He's too old now, but Carrie Ewells from the Princess Bride would have been great. And if he could do an American accent, which he has done in movies, he could have been Barney, and he would have been great as Leopold as well. I could see him in that.
Would have worked well, yeah.
Hmm. And he
Well,
can
he
do
had
the
like
sword
two
fights.
identities kind of in Princess Bride too.
Yeah, and he can do the sword fights. So
Yeah,
I think he's probably a little too old for it now, but
yeah.
he would have been. But he made it in the 30s. If Errol Flynn could have pulled off playing the slimy Leopold, he would have been great as Barney. I'm not sure he could have. I think he was an excellent actor, but I'm not sure he could have pulled off Leopold.
Yeah.
So Tyrone Power, maybe.
Well, that's another possibility. He can handle a sword.
Yeah,
I like Tyrone Power. He would be,
and he could
I'd
play
like to see
sleazy.
him in the role.
He could play sleazy characters too, so he could play both roles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the other great sword handler from the past that I would have to nominate Scott Williams, who did Zorro.
Yeah, and he was also an excellent actor.
Yes.
I mean, he would have basically been doing his secret identity as Zorro, as Leopold, but without the moral center.
He's
That's a
great.
good way to look
He's
at it.
one of my
Yeah.
favorites.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, we need to go back in time and form our own movie studio.
That's an excellent idea. Where's that time tunnel TV show?
Yeah, we need the time tunnel. So, okay, well, that is it for the Mad King. We appreciate everybody joining us. Our plan is in our next episode to do another commentary episode, this case with a couple of episodes from the 1980 Saturday morning cartoon done by Filmation, was it? Or was it?
Filmation, yes.
Yes, which was, I think, arguably, but very possibly the most faithful representation of Tarzan.
No argument here. It is the most faithful.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, so we are going to pick out a couple of those episodes and do commentary for them, much like we did a few months ago with 2 of the Johnny Weissmuller films. And then we're planning on talking about the Eternal Savage in one episode with Barney's sister Victoria. So those are our upcoming episodes. In the meantime, we do have a podcast store now, and you will find the link to that in the show notes, including a Mad Kings section. We have an artist friend of mine, Ben Alvarez, with the kind permission of Edgar Rice Burroughs Incorporated to use trademark images, has done some excellent art, which you can get on T-shirts and drinkware and towels and posters and greeting cards and such. So you'll be able to see Mad King images there, as well as Willa the Cowlet and Tars Tarkas and several other images inspired by the universe of Edgar Rice Burroughs. So please check out our store. Once again, the web address will be in our notes. And we also have an email address now to send us questions and comments. eggersmailbag@gmail.com. That will also be in the notes, so it'll be there for you to see. We would love to hear comments from you, especially if you like our podcast. If you don't like our podcast, you don't have to tell us. And if you've got questions here that we can discuss in later episodes of the podcast and that Jess can post on his Facebook page, send us your Edgar Rice Burroughs related questions as well. We would just really love to hear from you. We know we have a number of regular listeners. We're not sure of the exact numbers because my podcasting skills are still developing and I can't always get statistics from the various platforms we use. But I know there's a lot of you out there who seem to be enjoying this, and we would really love to hear your comments and your questions. And I can't think of anything else. Is there anything else we need to cover before saying goodbye?
I'd like to add on or put an accent on the fact that the materials in the online store are sanctioned by ERB Incorporated. So they're not, their quality, they're not pirate material or bootleg type stuff.
Yes.
And it has new artwork.
Yes, and it has new artwork. Yes, it is. And it was, and I think I said a brief thank you, but I'd like to say a very clear thank you to Edgar Rice Burroughs Incorporated for being so cooperative in allowing us to use trademark images. When we contacted them, we just wanted to say, are you okay doing a store and we'll just do general jungle images and such, and we won't touch trademarks. And they said, hey, would you guys like to do trademarks? And, you know, sent us an agreement for doing that. And it was just, they were really quite wonderful about it, and we appreciate it.
Yes.
So we'll be back again soon with another episode. And in the meantime, I will still be posting the mini episodes I do, where right now I'm doing a chapter by chapter analysis of A Princess of Mars. And so more episodes of that will be coming up soon. And so my name once more is Tim DeForest. My blog is comics, old time radio, and other cool stuff. You can find a link to my Amazon.com author page there if you want to spend even more money. And Jess and Scott, you guys want to plug anything on the way out?
Well, I have a
Let's
list
say
of things
thank
here to
you
talk about.
on my part.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Scott. I walked all over you there. So go ahead.
No,
and
that's okay.
Go ahead and repeat that if you please, so
Oh,
everybody can.
I just want to say thank you to everyone who has been enjoying the podcast.
Mhm.
And I have a couple things here to cover. First of all, thanks once again to John Martin, Burroughs aficionado, a longtime fan and a good friend who provided some of the reference material I used tonight in our podcast. Also want to be sure to mention again the ERB webcomics that includes the Mad King. Martin Gately there does a fine job writing those stories, and he's backed by a superb creative team who fills in every little nook and cranny of all the artwork, and it's just glorious images they're turning out. Be sure to take a look also at the Mad King and other t-shirts at the Edgar Rice Burroughs, EdgarRiceBurroughs.com store there. I am working on a podcast of my own, which I hope to launch here. We're in the month of May now, which I hope to launch this month. I really expected it to already be up. There's different delays have occurred there. So be on the lookout for a separate podcast from this one. And please, by all means, come join us at For the Love of All Things Edgar Rice Burroughs on Facebook with Little Pop, where we talk Edgar Rice Burroughs all the time. Love to have you all join us. And my thanks to you, Tim, and to you, Scott, for these sessions. We've done 18 of them now by my count. And I tell you, I've always enjoyed this. We always have a great time. I love to go through these ERB books.
Yeah, it's fun. I have fun with it too. So, okay, so that's it for now, and we will be back with a new episode soon.